Mm. Well, good morning. Good morning again. This morning, my talk is entitled Life is Brief. Focus on Awakening. You know, there is nothing that wakes you up to the briefness of life like someone you love more than anything in the world suddenly leaving this earthly realm. You know, life sometimes gives us gentle wake up calls and mindfulness bells, but it also gives us big events that can feel like the fiercest thing that we've had to face in this life. You know, Ram Dass used to call it fierce grace. In fact, when he himself had a stroke and he couldn't talk for some time, he called it fierce grace. And so death has been my intimate teacher as of late. You know, as my teacher, it seems to ask, how am I going to live today? I don't want to waste a second on what doesn't matter. You know, we have a finite amount of breaths that we're going to breathe in and then breathe out. And so I am feeling a sense of urgency to remind us of the briefness of life, of how things can change on a dime. And so the pressing matter is, how are we going to live today? How are we going to live in this moment and this next moment? You know, 30 days ago today, I joined that rare club that no one wants to be in, being initiated into the deepest grief of my life. And no, it's not easy at all. It has given me a kind of broken, open heartedness where I feel wide open, I feel undefended. It's left me feeling quite uninterested in the kind of endless trivial pursuits that humans can spend their life energy on. You know, my friend recently sent me this beautiful Lakota Native American teaching that said, you might recall what it's like to be with someone who has grieved deeply. The person has no layer of protection, nothing left to defend. The mystery is looking out through that person's eyes. For the time being, he or she has accepted the reality of loss and has stopped clinging to the past or grasping at the future. You know, in the groundless openness of sorrow, there is a wholeness. There is a wholeness of presence, and there is a deep natural wisdom. We tend to want to run from sorrow, you know, we tend to want to run from grief and run from loss. But there is this mystery. There is, as the Lakota said, this groundless openness and this wholeness of presence and this wisdom that can strip away everything that doesn't truly have value and place an urgent spotlight on what really matters in this precious human life that we have, that each of us has. I read the Katha Upanishad, one of the most sacred holy texts, you know, from India, at a ritual that my brother and I had prepared for my mom's preparation for cremation. And I also read it at her memorial. I want it read at my memorial. And I just want to tell you the story of the Katha Upanishad. It's a story about this pious young man. He's a teenager, actually, and his name is Nachiketa. And he has this really pure heart. He has a refined mind. He's an old soul. He's incredibly wise for his years. Well, Nachiketa and his father one day get into this argument because he sees his father being unscrupulous in his business dealings. He sees his father trying to sell old useless cows for good money, basically, you know, kind of cheating. And Nachiketa says to his father, why don't you offer me in trade? You know, because I am young and strong. I can be of value. I can be of use. And, the father recognized that his son was pointing out his lack of integrity. And so the father, in a fit of rage, said, I just offer you to Yama. I offer you to the god of death. And the son decides, okay, yeah, I want to go and I want to meet Yama, the god of death, because I want to know the nature of reality. And I want to know, is there life after death? What is the true nature of who we are? Well, the father immediately regrets casting his son off, and he feels terrible, and he begs his son not to go. But his son leaves. He goes to visit Yama. And Yama, the god of death, is quite impressed by this boy's pure heart and his wisdom. And when the boy had arrived at Yama's abode, Yama was not there, and the boy had to wait for 3 days. And so when Yama returned, he offered the boy 3 boons for not, honoring his guests for each day that the boy had to wait. Well, all that Nachikenta wanted was to know the nature of reality. Is death real? Is death the end? Is there life after death? Is there a way to put death itself to death? And when the boy asked these questions, Yama tried to avoid answering them. They were quite profound and quite deep. And he instead, offered this boy everything you could basically want in the world. He offered him fame, he offered him riches and land and power and wives, etc. But the boy was this wise soul, this old soul, and he didn't want anything of the world. And Yama, seeing that the boy wanted nothing but the deepest truth, he found him worthy of the highest teachings. And so he gave Nachiketa the deepest teachings. And he taught him about the true self, and that the true self lives within all beings, and that it is not subject to birth and death. He taught him that the self is formless in the world of forms and changeless in the world of change. He taught him that single pointed spiritual practice and also divine grace would set him free from the illusion of death. And he taught him to read and meditate deeply on these teachings, and that it would awaken him to the true reality. So I love this story of the Katha Upanishad. And right now I so relate to it. I relate to this young boy who is unenamored of the trappings of the world and who wants awakening. He wants to know the deepest truth. He wants to know the true self beyond death, beyond any earthly limitation. I feel that I'm walking hand in hand with Yama, with this fierce teacher. And I have felt, in the past, fairly uninterested in kind of the trappings of the world for some time. But this walk with the death of my mom, I feel like has more fully liberated me from all things trivial, or frivolous. It feels like a kind of beautiful sobriety, a kind of clarity of mind that sees through the veil, and through the things that so often can distract our mind's attention. I know I've noticed in this last month, I haven't watched a single show, not a moment of entertainment on a screen for 4 weeks, because really I can't, it feels like painful noise, there's something so rich to stay with in this grief and sorrow and in the teachings of it and in this heartbroken, open, wider state, it's like a consuming, pressing, urgent desire I'm feeling to know what is permanent underneath all impermanence, to know the way out, to know the freedom from the suffering of impermanence. I have a really dear, wise girlfriend. Well, I have quite a few, but I have one in particular that I feel is a bodhisattva, and she wrote me an email this week, late at night, one night, and she seems to know that grief comes the strongest at night. And she checked in with me, and I wrote her that, I've been watching videos of my mom, and, listening to voicemails and crying quite a bit, and just fully diving into the grief. And she wrote me something very poignant, this wisdom. She said, so challenging what this realm asks of us, giving us so much that we love, but none of it permanent, with devastating loss hardwired inevitably into the equation. Yeah, that's how it feels. And we do everything to ignore impermanence until that fierce grace arrives. And, when actually we would be wiser to be like Nachiketa, and bravely face impermanence and have a talk with Yama and seek to know the truth that truly can set us free. I'm discovering that there are many gifts of grace and loss. My friend also said that the depth of my grief attests to the depth of my love. Mom has always been my greatest teacher in life, and now in her physical absence, the depth of sorrow opens my heart to the sorrow of all beings. It helps me become what I always wanted to be, which is an embodiment of compassion. That is my deepest prayer, to merge with a mother of compassion. And what I see is we can't truly feel another's suffering as our own if we don't have an intimate understanding of suffering and loss, if we haven't really been fully with it and received its fierce and graceful teachings. And so grief seems to melt any protection that we might erect, to avoid suffering. It seems to make our heart as wide as the world, and it makes our compassion for those who suffer more real than it's ever been. I really am feeling that. I'm feeling a oneness with the heart of the world and all that humans go through. Joan Chittister wrote, grief is a sign we love something more than ourselves. Grief makes us worthy to suffer with the rest of the world. The Lakota, back to the Lakota teachings, they say a person who is grieving is considered most Awaken, most holy. Awaken is holy. There's a sense that when someone is struck by the sudden lightning of loss, he or she stands on the threshold of the spirit world. The prayers of those who grieve are considered especially strong, and it is proper to ask them for their help. So I'd say that grief removes a veil that might have kept you from seeing clearly what is most essential and what is not important in this life. Kathleen Singh, who I quote often, in her beautiful book, The Grace in Aging, she wrote, most of us have spent a long time with our attention trapped in illusions, in frivolity, in the unessential, in the past and in the future. And yet later is not always a luxury. Later is not always a luxury that will be available to us. And, Kathleen Singh, she was a longtime hospice worker. She was a therapist. And she writes with this urgency, maybe because in some way she must have sensed she only had a few more years to live. She wrote the book, The Grace in Aging, in 2014. And she left the earth only a few years later. She left the earth at 71. And, her message in a nutshell was that grace comes to those who open to it with the last part of life, right? Grace and aging. In her book, she suggests we do a life review. We do life review work before the end of our lives, but with those eyes of conscience that people describe in the near-death experiences. She said that looking with these clear eyes, free of ego, allows for some noble qualities of our essential nature to emerge. It allows a deeper love. It allows a willingness to forgive. It allows an immense gratitude for all the grace in one's life. And it also allows letting go of the story and all the snags of the story that we tell. And it ultimately allows letting go of the storyteller, which is another name for the ego. Think about it. If today was your last day, if today was your last day, is everything forgiven? Is there any unfinished business? Is your heart at peace? Is your mind at peace? And my mom always called this realm we live in here on the planet Earth School, right? And I am more sure than ever, it is about awakening consciousness. It's about using discernment to make the very most of the hours we have left in this life. And I get it. There are surely a million distractions for the human mind, especially when now we can scroll for hours on end, and I just see kind of humanity lost in the scrolling world. There's a million distractions. But I'll tell you, that's why, in a way, those big events, those initiations that we get in life sometimes, they're a gift. They wake us out of that distracted mode. And sometimes they are fierce. They're a fierce gift. They shake us out of a million ways. We just want to entertain our mind, right? And distract ourselves really from the greater purpose of our lives. The Dalai Lama says it best. He says, we need to develop an intense longing to cultivate the awakening mind, seeing it as a pressing need. We have to cultivate it through meditation and repeated and prolonged habituation. I have just found myself intuitively stepping up my meditation practice in this last month, a couple times a day now, and even sometimes, a few hours in the evenings, basically from 9 to about 12. And it's so rich, it's just so transforming. It's this expansive mind capacity that I believe has allowed me to feel my mom's presence. I feel her conscious presence. I feel my mind merging with hers, and we did that life review together the day she died that evening. I felt her so strongly, and I feel like it's because of the meditation, so much meditation in my life. But what I experienced in that life review is that something happens, like it's like the ego, that you're free of the ego in that life review, right after death. And it's like you have this total honesty, and you have this way of seeing that you have never seen so clearly before. And, when we did this life review, it's like I saw her reviewing her life. It was like I was just right beside her in that review. But I also saw my life in the ways that it related to her, and ways I could have done better. But it wasn't judgmental at all. It was all for learning. It was all held in love. In Graham Coleman's commentary book on the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, he writes, one of the most challenging aspects of the description of the after-death state is the idea that death holds up an all-seeing mirror to our eyes. And it's a hard concept to embrace, because in our daily life, we usually remain somewhat oblivious to the consequences of our actions. But, in that life review, I saw my own actions clearly, and I felt Mom seeing her actions clearly. And at the same time, I felt this immense presence of love that allowed us to gain understanding. Hence the idea of Earth School. It's to glean wisdom. That's why we're here. And we glean that wisdom both from our achievements and from our mistakes. They have a place. And so to see our life with this kind of humble, open clarity, from a clear conscience, without a defending ego in the way, it was incredibly powerful. It has been life-changing, really. And, it is what I would pray for every one of us, to have this grace where we can see ourselves and our life completely clearly, with this sense of conscience without ego, because it fills us with such humility and a willingness to learn, and a turned up desire to awaken now, to make our lives filled with virtue and not waste any time on what is unimportant. Now, if I was leaving this earth tomorrow, and who knows, right? I would say seek to live your most meaningful, noble life now without any delay, and value more than anything awakening your consciousness. In Kathleen Singh's book, she suggests doing a review of your life now and creating your own spiritual biography. And I think this is a great idea. You know, contemplating your spiritual journey, you know, charting the timeline in your life of when you had spiritual promptings, when you had awakenings, the timeline of when you had growth spurts in your life. You know, think about it. When did you feel spirit strongly? You know, when did it, you know, open in you and awaken in you? When did you really make effort and change your life? You know, I'd love to hear about that chapter in your life. You know, and there may have been times you hit a plateau. We all do. You know, maybe you feel that now. You know, maybe you feel a bit of dryness or distance from that inner love, that inner presence. You know, remember those moments when you felt grace and when you had your biggest realizations. It's wise to ask ourselves, are we living the highest spiritual truths and realizations of our spiritual life moment to moment and day to day with our family, with our coworkers, with our community, and with our friends? You know, last week after service, we had a meeting about unity at the Lake's future. And many of you spoke, and I just wanted to listen. I was so interested in what everyone said. And some people shared about how finding unity really opened them to a lot of spiritual teachings and spiritual growth. And it was a real blessing of grace and growth spurt finding unity. And I also heard some folks, you know, wondering kind of out loud where they were on their spiritual path now, where they are. I believe, as the Buddhists do, they talk about the Sangha, the spiritual community, being one of the three precious jewels. It's a priceless jewel, I feel. You know, we're greatly supported when we share wisdom and when we sit in silence together, when we practice together. And when we just keep returning to the deeper truth of who we are again and again together, when we just keep on bowing and allowing and forgiving and letting go and returning again and again to the deeper truth of who we are as love, as that infinite light. So the question to me that hangs in the air is, what can we bring? Which is perhaps as important as what can we get? You know, what consciousness do we bring? What gifts do we bring? Kathleen Singh writes, we and only we are responsible for our spiritual path. We are responsible for our healing, for our examining emotional reactivity and working on it, for keeping up practices that take us more deeply into our heart and into a mind of peace, for putting our realizations into everyday life. So it's so worthwhile to do a life review before death comes, right? To ask ourselves with compassionate honesty, how is the state of my mind? Is it at peace? Is it quiet and calm and still? Is it able to stay focused on identification with awareness, with that infinite light? If it is, then bless your efforts. You know, you are doing great. You're so on track. But maybe your honest answer is, you know, actually, no, my mind is often not at peace. It isn't quiet. It's actually disturbing where it goes sometimes. You know, it tends to rerun a story that brings up feelings of hurt or feelings of unfulfillment. And if that is your own honest answer, that right there is mindfulness itself. You know, that's that beautiful egoless, you know, conscience that sees clearly. And it's a starting point. It's a starting point to decide, I want change. I want to get on with this spiritual work to renew my commitment to take my attention off negative thinking and off the ways I distract myself, because I know life is brief. And so, I'm going to dedicate my time and attention to spiritual transformation in myself. The mystic Theodore Nottingham, he wrote, "This less traveled, more difficult road is the living out of a spiritual life rather than a mere survival in our short passage through time," right? So many teachings in unity and in all the world religions, they're about learning to place our attention on what is important, right? On the inner stillness, the inner world of connection with spirit versus the outer distractions, on the most expansive, positive, life-giving thoughts versus life-draining thoughts, right? Thoughts that bring your energy down, right? So aside from more meditation, I have been chanting mantras much more. I've had a mantra for many years, and I've chanted it for so long that my mind just goes there. It'll just say the mantra many, many times a day. But I've been adding more and more mantra to my day, every day. And that mantra that we sang, that chant that I wrote for Mom, I am, we are infinite light. I am, we are infinite love. That's a really good one. And as I said, I wrote it for her because she said her mantra was, I am light, I am love. And so it's a way that I'm holding space in her transition in this period of the Bardo for her highest consciousness. And I'm holding space for my highest consciousness and truth. So I recommend that simple mantra, I am, we are infinite light. I am, we are infinite love. And what I want to say most of all today is live like there's no time to waste. And it reminds me of that song, Live Like We're Dying. I think it's a country song. Kathleen suggests living with the question, I wonder how many finite number of breaths that I'll breathe in this lifetime. I wonder how many of those breaths remain. This next in-breath, will it come? This next out-breath, is it the last? Yeah. So in closing, I just invite you to reflect on the briefness of this life and on the importance of keeping your attention on what matters and asking yourself with that compassionate honesty, what healing is necessary in me so that the teachings and the realizations I've had in my spiritual life are fully lived and embodied in my everyday moment to moment life. We can ask, is this thought I'm having right now, is it fortifying a sense of separate self, or is this thought I'm having right now freeing me from negativity so I can feel that infinite light I am? This life is precious. It's precious and it's short. And I don't know how many more talks I'll give. I know I only have 2 more talks to give you all at Unity at the Lake before my mini sabbatical. So seek, excuse me, seek what takes you more deeply into being and heal what pulls you back into reactivity and separation. Live so that when you leave and you have that life review, you feel so good about the life you lived. May you and may all beings fully embody and live in the infinite light that you are. May it be so. Om Shanti. Om Peace.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm sure that means something very special to everyone who's ever experienced personal loss.